Good day, everyone. We are reviewing Wetzel's Limnology textbook, edition number 4, and this is chapter 9, Structure and Productivity of Aquatic Ecosystems by Lisette D. Senner-Point-Domis and Belinda J. Robson. And Lisette is with the Netherlands Institute of Ecology, and Belinda is with the Murdoch University in Murdoch, Western Australia. So let's get started here. The ecosystem concept. An ecosystem comprises all the life forms, microbes, plants, animals, and the inorganic context, sediment types, water regimes, water quality, etc., that they live in. Together, the life forms interact with each other. They influence and are influenced by their environment, carrying out ecosystem processes such as the transport of nitrogen and carbon. Ecosystems are highly complex systems and have features such as emergent properties and threshold of transformability. Indeed, ecological studies of freshwater ecosystems have played a vital part in understanding the dynamics of complex systems, such as the identification of thresholds for regime shifts in shallow lakes. Scientists usually name ecosystems based on their physical features, but these places are grouped because they show the same dynamics and controlling factors. Indeed, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, has classified and described the features and dynamics of every ecosystem type on Earth in their global ecosystem topology. In this chapter, we introduce freshwater ecosystems, how they are structured, and how they function. Ecotone is the term used to describe habitat that lie at the boundary between two ecosystems. The ecotone between rivers and the land is called the riparian zone. Between lakes and the land is called the fringing zone. And between rivers and the ocean lies another ecosystem type, the estuary. There's also a fourth dimension to inland water ecosystem, which is the groundwater, that underlies many water bodies. The ecotone between surface and groundwater is called the aporeic zone. Understanding ecosystem function in rivers and lakes requires an understanding of riparian fringing and aporeic zones, and often of estuaries too. So far, discussion in this book has been directed to the basic physical aspects of water itself, how water is distributed to rivers and lake basins, the origins of rivers and of lake basins, and how the catchment basin morphology is modified with time, and the hydrology of inland water systems. Here, the flows of nutrients and energy throughout the catchment will be examined. The biota is inseparably coupled with the dynamics of many chemical elements, in particular nutrients and the biogeochemical regulation of nutrient fluxes and recycling. Before discussing the major chemical constituents in detail, however, a brief overview of the ecosystem components and how they interrelate is useful. So let's see. Catchment concept. As introduced in chapter 4 and 5, a catchment is the area of land surrounding a water body through and over which water flows into that water body. The size and geological composition of catchments thus influences freshwater ecosystem, and catchment geomorphology influences the rates and volumes of water and materials carried by that flow entering waterways. Catchment boundaries are delineated by the high points of land at their edges. Catchment size may vary from very small, such as the teeny catchments of volcanic crater lakes, delineated by the upper rim of their crater, to enormous, such as the Amazon River basin. River catchments may be divided into sub-catchments, which comprise tributaries of the main stem river. River catchment may also include lakes, such as glacial lakes in river headwaters or floodplain lakes on lowland rivers. Geomorphology. Terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems are linked by the movement of water and materials through the drainage basin to recipient rivers and lakes, and by the movement of materials back into the terrestrial and estuarine ecosystem from inland waters. Chemical and biological processes modify the composition of the materials dissolved within and carried by the water. Geological features of the landscape govern the direction of movement, and particularly the residence time of water during movement in surface and groundwater towards rivers and lakes. So before we move on, let's look at figure 9-1 here. Terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems are linked by movement of water and materials through the drainage basin to recipient rivers and lakes, and by the movement of material back into the terrestrial and estuarine ecosystem from inland waters. So what we're seeing, we have pretty much like the upper part of the watershed here, or they call it the catchments. And then we have migratory fish. We have also the migratory fish here. We have ducks that are enjoying like a riverine or maybe an estuarine ecosystem. And then we have biological cycles going on. So for example, we have the black heron here that may be eating carp or bass. And then we have all the way to the teeny organisms, such as the zooplankton and the phytoplankton. And then we have bats nourishing, let's say, a falcon or a hawk. And so all of these animals are and flora are depending on each other and are functioning as a whole in a cycle of life and death. The duration of contact with soil and associated microbiota influences the content of dissolved salts and organic products conveyed in the water. Terrestrials and wetland vegetation in the drainage basin influence the chemical content of both water falling through their leaf canopy and as well as water in the soil by selective assimilation and storage within their tissues. The movements and fluxes of a number of these compounds will be treated separately in subsequent chapters. From vegetated catchments, such as in forests, usually less than half of the incoming precipitation leaves as runoff and groundwater seepage to streams and rivers. Removal of vegetation greatly accelerates the flow of runoff from the landscapes and increases the amount, particularly when vegetation is replaced by impervious surfaces, altering evapotranspiration. During periods of high precipitation, water in streams may exceed the capacity of the river channel and may inundate the floodplain. During this inundation, organic matter, OM, and nutrients are deposited on floodplains and in floodplain wetlands, resulting in highly productive aquatic habitats. As floodwaters recede, organic carbon fixed on the floodplain returns to river channel in the form of detritus, fish, and other animals. Thus, the geomorphology of the land partly determines the soil and ionic composition, slope, and in combination with climate, the vegetation cover. Within the context of climate, vegetation and soil composition influence not only the amount of runoff, but the composition and quantity of organic matter entering streams and lakes. Human effects on climate change and element cycling are now so profound that we live in what many believe will soon be defined as a new era, the Anthropocene. These human impacts, especially changes in climate and land use, have reduced the influence of catchment geology on aquatic ecosystems. Instead, water regimes as defined below is now recognized as an important factor affecting aquatic ecosystems. Water regimes in Anthropocene. Water regime is the term used to describe the annual or multi-annual pattern of flow in rivers or inundation in lakes and wetlands. In some regions, for example the boreal forest, the vast majority of rivers and lakes are perennially flowing, inundated, despite freezing over each winter. In other regions, for example arid, semi-arid, Mediterranean climates, the majority of rivers and lakes dry out. The frequency and intensity of drying varies between climates. Mediterranean climate tend to have greater annual predictability of flows than arid climate, but also between regions with the same climates. To make sense of all of this variability, water regimes have been divided into spatial and temporal components, each of which describes an aspect of the water regime. The spatial components of the water regime comprise extent, area inundated, and depth, volume in discharge, a known cross-sectional area in a specific time, and variability. The temporal components of the flow regimes are timing when water is, okay, and variability. These components are often combined into classification. For example, the term episodic is often used to denote water bodies that fill unpredictably, such as those that result from cyclonic rainfall in arid zones. The term seasonal is used for predictable patterns of wetting and drying in climates where there are distinct wet and dry seasons, such as Mediterranean climates, temperate climates, and some tropical climates. These components of water regimes, separately and in combination, are important for life in inland waters. For example, biota may be adapted for episodic filling of arid zone lakes by being able to lie dormant in sediment for periods of years. However, when such lakes are the terminus of episodic rivers, water may be present for long periods, and so biota may be adapted to breed when inundation occurs, because even though it occurs rarely, the duration will be sufficient for successful population recruitment. In most types of freshwater ecosystem, many species will be adapted to the water regime that has occurred historically in that system. This may be in relation of the timing of reproduction or dispersal, or the presence of habitats necessary for the reproduction or juvenile or adult survival. Because of the strong relationship between water regimes and populations of microbes, plants, and animals changing, this most fundamental of variables is fraught with risk and known to alter ecosystem function. Global warming is changing global climate in many ways, most of which will affect freshwater ecosystems. Relative to increases in mean climatic conditions, there is a growing consensus that extreme events may more strongly affect aquatic ecosystem functioning. Furthermore, although rising temperatures affect freshwater species and ecosystem, changes to hydrological variables have even more substantial impacts because they alter water regimes. In some regions, rainfall is increasing and snow and ice cover is decreasing. So rivers and lakes may receive a higher volume of warmer water as well as more light. In other regions, rainfall is decreasing and has caused threshold changes in lakes and streams, perennial to seasonal to ephemeral, causing some to dry out for the first time, altering biotic communities. On top of this, human water demands for sanitation, irrigation, and hydropower have led to increased water abstraction and river regulations, both of which may cause the drying of wetlands or downstream river channels, streams and rivers. In flowing lotic waters, we refer to the water regimes as the flow regime. This is because the unidirectional nature of flow in rivers and stream distinguishes them from other ecosystems. Furthermore, because the lotic ecosystems are linear in form, they have an enormous surface riverbank area to volume ratio, which heavily exposes them to the influence of their catchments and human impacts that occur there. In flowing channels, the substratum may be unstable and rearranged by flowing water, causing interaction between flow and geology structure river habitats. Because of the primacy of flow, especially in upland rivers and streams, many lotic plants and animals are adapted to persist in, and in some cases even use fast-flowing water. When studying a river ecosystem, ecologists distinguish between upland and lowland rivers because there are basic physical and functional differences between them. Upland rivers are less likely to have floodplains than lowland rivers, and they are generally erosive, whereas lowland rivers are generally depositional. The differences in substratum and flow influence ecosystem function, the balance between autotrophic and heterotrophic production, and the importance of benthic versus pelagic food webs. Lakes. In lentic or standing waters, we often refer to the water regime as the water balance. The water balance of a lake is determined by the area, by the surface and subsurface inflows and outflows, precipitation and evaporation. As such, a lake ecosystem consists of the lake itself and its entire catchment. Lakes that drain into a river or ocean are called exorheic or open lakes, whereas lakes that only drain through the subsurface or through evaporation are called closed or endorheic lakes. Lakes have been recognized as sentinels of global change as they integrate information from the entire catchment, reflected in their loading of inorganic and organic nutrients, but also synthetic pollutants such as pharmaceutical and pesticides. Through the increased understanding of both terrestrial and aquatic biomarkers, our understanding of how terrestrial biota regulate loading to streams and recipient lakes and vice versa has vastly improved in recent decades. For instance, inland waters are no longer perceived as passive pipes of organic carbon to the ocean, but rather their role in actively processing organic carbon has been recognized. Catchment areas input both particulate organic matter, POM, and especially dissolved organic matter, DOM, to lakes, and this dissolved and colloidal OM, organic matter, once it reaches the lake, regulates many ecosystem processes. Extremely heterogeneous and productive wetland fringing areas often lie at the interface between the terrestrial drainage basin and the open water zone of the lake, and also occur on floodplains of lowland rivers. These complex wetlands, littoral areas, are exceedingly important in regulating metabolism in the receiving water body. Since the majority of lakes globally are small and relatively shallow, the metabolically active wetland and littoral components dominate the productivity of most lakes of the world. The effects that terrestrial wetlands and littoral biota have on the quality and quantity of inorganic and organic loading to a lake can be profound. Water laden with inorganic and organic substances flows from higher elevation to the recipient lake basin or river channel in both ground and surface flows. Chemical and biological reactions occur en route that selectively modify the quality and quantity of nutrients and organic substances entering the water body. Surface flows often pass through the wetland littoral complex and selectively lose or gain inorganic and organic compound before reaching the open water. Finally, appreciable loading of inorganic and organic substances to the atmosphere is common from the industrial and agricultural activities of humans. These compounds may reach the drainage basin and lake itself via dry fall and with wet and frozen precipitation. This source of loading is often a significant portion of the total nutrients and contaminant loading to a lake and was a substantial problem prior to the 1980s, when acid rain acidified many lakes in the northern hemisphere. Spatial structure and terminology in lakes and rivers. Apart from thermal structuring, due to the distribution of heat through water, lakes and rivers also display other forms of spatial structures. The bottom of a lake is separable from the free open water, the pelagic zone, and is further divided into a number of rather distinct transitional zones from the shoreline to the deepest point. The supralittoral zone also lies entirely above the water level, but is subject to spray from waves. The littoral zone encompasses the shoreline region between the highest and lowest seasonal water levels, together with the rest of the shallow perimeter where aquatic plants can grow because light reaches the lake bed. Emergent aquatic plants protrude above the water surface. Submerged aquatic plants and floating aquatic plants, roots, either free-floating or are common in undisturbed littoral zones. Thus, in shallow lakes, primary production is possible across the entire lake bed and volume, so the littoral can be viewed as existing across the entire lake bed and may be completely filled by aquatic plants. Below the littoral and deeper lake lies a transitional zone, the littori profondo, which is occupied by scattered photosynthetic algae and bacteria, or a bacterial mat, and is often adjacent to the metalimnion of stratified lakes. The remainder of the sediments, which consists of exposed phytosediment, free vegetation due to the lack of light, is referred as the profundo zone. Upshore from the littoral is the fringing zone, which is generally vegetated with plants capable of tolerating inundation during the wet season. The fringing zone is analogous to the riparian zone of rivers. So before we do that, continue, let's see here. Let's look at figure 9-2. The lake ecosystem showing the drainage basin with terrestrial photosynthesis PS of organic matter. Movement of nutrients and dissolved organic matter and particulate organic matter in surface and groundwater flows toward the lake basin. Shown are the chemical and biotic alterations of these materials en route, especially as they pass through the highly productive and metabolically active wetlands. Littoral zone of the lake, net productivity in metric tons per hectares per year. So this is organic productivity in hectares per year, as we just saw. So forest, so the one that has the highest productivity is the emergent microphyte. And so those are like the wetlands. So these are the emergent microphyte. And then the second highest are the submerged, actually they are the epiphytic algae. So epiphytic algae. And then after that, the forest has pretty high productivity, as well as annuals, and then the lowest is phytoplankton and submerged microphyte. And I think that's going to be it.